Today we'll be looking at an extract from Part 2 in Albert Camus' novel The Outsider, looking in particular at page 63. About his own writing, Albert Camus said this: "A long time ago I summed up The Outsider in a sentence which I realise is extremely paradoxical. In our society, any man who doesn't cry at his mother's funeral is liable to be condemned to death. I simply mean that the hero of the book is condemned because he doesn't play the game. He refuses to lie. Lying is not only saying what isn't true, it is also, in fact especially, saying more than is true, and in the case of the human heart, saying more than one feels. We all do it every day to make life simpler. But Musso, contrary to appearances, doesn't want to make life simpler. He says what he is, he refuses to hide his feelings, and society immediately feels threatened. For example, he is asked to say that he regrets his crime in time-honoured fashion. He replies that he feels more annoyance about it than true regret, and it is this nuance that condemns him." In Part 2, the courtroom is used as a powerful symbol by Camus, as it symbolises society as a whole. The law functions as the will of the people, and the jury sits in judgment on behalf of the entire community. In The Outsider, Camus strengthens this court of society symbolism by having nearly every one of the minor characters from the first half of the novel reappear as witnesses in the courtroom. Also, the court's attempts to construct a logical explanation for Musso's crime symbolise humanity's attempts to find rational explanations for the irrational events of the universe. These attempts, which Camus believed futile, exemplify the absurdity Camus outlined in his philosophy. Indeed, Musso has no discernible reason for his actions, such as his decision to marry Marie and his decision to kill the Arab. Society nonetheless attempts to fabricate or impose rational explanations for Musso's irrational actions. The idea that things sometimes happen for no reason and that events sometimes have no meaning is disruptive and threatening to society. The trial sequence in Part 2 of the novel represents society's attempts to manufacture a rational order. Therefore, the trial of Musso is positioned to make it seem as though he is tried not for the murder of the Arab, but for the apparently insensitive, heartless and unemotional way in which he buries his mother. He is accused of being a man with no soul, with nothing human about him, and it is said that not one of those moral qualities which normal men possess had any place in his mentality. The use of no, nothing, not one, demonstrates the contempt of society against a man who is not able to grieve in a socially acceptable way for his mother. And the moment ends with Musso's focus returning to the motif of heat, as he speaks about the trial and the prosecution in particular. "But he spoke at much greater length of my crime, at such length indeed that I lost the thread and was conscious only of the steadily increasing heat." Descriptions of mundane and physical experiences are in contrast with how humanity acts and feels. The absurd is the confrontation between the human subject and a world that surrounds and will go on beyond him. And Camus dramatises this confrontation by referring to the natural landscape in its permanence and qualities of heat, to contrast with the impermanence of the mortal flesh. And yet the human subject aspires to some form of continuation of life, but must accept the finite nature of his existence, as opposed to Hopkins' beliefs on eternal reality. So it is Part 2 that truly introduces the language of assessment and reason. Musso is forced into self-reflective consciousness. Part 2 is Musso's commentary on his life, in which he attempts to understand existence and what it stands for, as he explains, "I have never been able really to regret anything at all in all my life." The prosecutor and Musso's lawyer both offer explanations for Musso's crime that are based on logic, reason, and the concept of cause and effect. Yet these explanations have no basis, in fact serve only as attempts to diffuse the frightening idea that the universe is irrational. The entire trial is therefore an example of absurdity, an instance of humankind's futile attempt to impose rationality on an irrational universe.